showcasing students what cells is all about can be a little bit daunting or overwhelming for a couple of reasons. One might be in access to a couple of tools, like for example, we talked about microscopes, but also maybe online resources that show a little bit of a simulation on how cells look like, and also a couple of things that make cells to survive. And so what we're going to dive into are two approaches that you can integrate into how cells can be presented to students, not merely the higher level, like let's say grade 11, grade 12, or grade 10, but a little bit of the introductory level, looking at the grade 4 maybe, but getting close to grade 8 level. And so, first is having students to maybe let us know what they think about cells. Now, some students might come about like, okay, it is the smallest unit of any living organism, and some students can actually comprehend how small can it be. Can it be in the visible scale, like in the meters, centimeters, or something millimeters, or a fraction of a millimeters? And students should be able to recognize that something that's small is something that you can see getting close to the micrometer level. And so another thing is students can brainstorm concerning how we can visualize cells. I mean, we've seen technological advancements in terms of things smaller than things that we can see. Some students can talk about, the use of the lenses that you actually, or hand lenses that people use. But then it's like, can you go a little bit deeper into that? And that is where integrating lenses can actually come about, the use of cool gadgets like microscopes. And definitely there are different variations, like the ones in my school. We do have the ones that run on battery, and there's some that do run on electricity, so those little access can actually get students to see why do we use batteries versus why we use cords. And that cord part can be an advantage because you don't have to buy batteries all the time, but it could be a disadvantage, which means if those cords are not handled with care, it could either damage in the lab or could be a tripping hazard. So those are little avenues that students can brainstorm behind microscope. But we're going to dive into the details concerning that. Now, when you're talking about, in terms of the number of cells, in terms of the range, we can look at two avenues for students to choose. Students can choose either bigger scale, where you have many cells coming together, that is a visualization of what we see in the outside world, like multicellular organisms, like plants and animals, and how you can dive deeper by picking up leaves and looking inside to see how it is organized. Or you can pick up, let's say, an insect and dive in deep depth into how those particular insect organs actually are organized at that particular smaller level. But you can go into just single organisms, like going into a pond. We call it unicellular organisms, and you can just look at it like, there's nothing in this from just the naked eye. But then when you look in under the microscope, you can like, wow, these are so much more organisms out there. We'll talk about those in details in terms of a couple of things in the unicellular level that can be exposed, that students can expose themselves to, or possible things that they can see in a pond. And so a couple of students might actually come up with questions in terms of guesses as to how much cells that we have as humans. You can give estimates. This can be a little bit of like a Kahoot activity, or couple of guess and check, and this here should get them thinking about the scale of the universe, just based on organism size. If you have an ant, how many cells will make up an ant, and those cells are specialized in a way, but then you're getting into complex organisms, like for example we humans, and they should come up with around something in the trillions, tens of trillions approximately, with regards to how much cells on average a human should have. Precisely some books will say 60 trillion cells, and that is like really impressive. But then the most common one guess students can guess is, what's the most common cell you can think of right now? Some people can come up with, okay, I think the common ones will be the skin, because of course it's obvious you can. But then when you look inside, people can actually say that, oh, most likely they should think about the blood, because that is really important with regards to many functions, on how cells survive, due to the presence of that circulatory system, the blood being able to capture critical nutrients, most especially gases, exchanges that happens, and many more things that has to offer. So the first focus that you want to approach cells will be, how does a plant cell, which is a multicellular, or in this case a multicellular type, a plant, different from or differ from another multicellular organism, which are animals? How do their physical characteristics reflect how the cells are set up for plants versus animals? And there are three categories that you want to highlight for them. One is, what are the things that animal cells have that plant cells don't have? And pretty much a plant cell has everything that an animal cells have. A plant cell has a cell membrane that's inside, but then when you look at the plant cell itself, what an animal cell don't have but the plant cell has, that is where the difference is actually clear. Like, for example, a plant cell has a cell wall, but an animal cell don't have a cell wall, and that reflects like their rationale, students' rationale behind why that is the case. They can actually think about the flexibility or malleability of the human skin, for example, compared to that of a plant, which is a little bit more rigid, and also in terms of storage, supporting the plant, in general as a whole, compared to animals, which are a little bit more flexible in terms of the skin thickness, I'll put it that way, or rigidity of the animal, which is less compared to that of plants. However, what is common between both of them is the cell membrane, and that is where you have the outer barrier, which is for animals, which allows it to, interact with the surroundings and also allow things to go through the plant, the animals, between the environment, outside environment, and its cytoplasm. Let's put it that way. And also, in terms of the characteristics, you can think about it as an oily take on it that prevents water loss. Looking at the cell membrane. Plant cell, if you want to go ahead, you can talk about how the cell wall of the plant cell, what it is made out of, and that in this case you can say cellulose is one of those critical type of sugar that are of course complex sugars that is present in plants, and this leads to fibers, things that we human digest. We can really break down fibers. We do have bacteria in our gut that enable us to break down fibers. So it's pretty interesting to have that connection here with regards to just the outer membrane of plants versus that of animals. Another part here is a vesicle. A plant cell has a vesicle. This is important for storing water, and really crucial because when you look at the details concerning how plants create food, it needs two materials. It needs the intake of carbon dioxide alongside water for it to make sugar, and so a lot of storage of water is necessary for this to happen in broad daylight. At night is the other way around. I will talk about that later, but yes, water storage is really important. That is why we do have a large vesicle that is present in plant cells. However, in animal cells, they don't have a vesicle. Now, when you look at common other things that plant cell could have, definitely has that animals don't, that is called the, and this here is just the key machine behind capturing sunlight. It's green in nature, because of the green pigment, and most importantly, it performs photosynthesis, which is what we highlighted previously from the storage of vesicles, because vesicle has water, but then this captures sunlight and uses the carbon dioxide breaks interacting with water to make your oxygen release into the atmosphere and sugar produced. So this here is one of the key differences between plant and animal cells. Now, students can have these comparisons, but at the same time, things that they have in common. Like, for example, we already highlighted the cytoplasm. We can highlight also the powerhouse of the cell, which is the one that produces the energy, ATP, all that cool stuff, the mitochondria. Another one is the information storage unit that directs the overall cell on what to do and regulates it properly. This is where you have the nucleus, that is where you have the genetic material, DNA, deoxyribose nucleic acid. That is, students should be able to be comfortable with that name and meaning, and the importance of that. You can talk about the cytoplasm, which we talked about earlier, which is just the jelly fluid like material that is around the space in the cell. You have the endoplasmic reticulum, really important in terms of how interconnecting the sac is, and that increases the surface area of it for it to be able to manufacture proteins. When you have your RNA being created and then it goes to the ribosomes, and that produces proteins that are important for repair of the cell and also functioning of the cell, let's put it that way. And also fat, packaging of fat and moving it to different locations of the body. In terms of the scale overall of the size of plant versus animal cell, so you can think about, okay, which one is bigger? Is it plant or animals? Oh, of course, you have tall trees, massive stems or trunks, you have incredible branches, you have a lot of leaves, so you should expect plants to be bigger in size than that of animals. So that should really translate really well to in the cellular level, a cell of animal versus a cell of plant, which one is bigger? Of course, plant cell should be bigger than that of animal cell. So those are things that students can actually rationalize and try to translate into the cellular level for plant versus animals. Now, in terms of visual representations, you can have this in the form of a Venn chart. Students can have all this information and organize them, have the animal and you have the plant and what they have in common. Other avenues could be giving them images of plants with that of animal, and put arrows on things that they have in common, and the other arrows are things that they don't have in common at the other sides of the images. Another one can be in schools, I remember having a particular organization you can think of, and how that organization structure reflects that or parallels to that of the functioning of a cell. And so looking at the functions of different organelles in a cell, how does that translate into different institutions? It could be in a school, we have the powerhouse. It could be either the office that directs the entire school on how it should function. That is essentially the nucleus or instruction wise. But in terms of energy source that provides energy to the entire school, you can think of like the electricity grid that powers the entire school in terms of electricity wise, allows your projectors to function, your specific Chromebooks and all that cool stuff, and you can have like many more things that you can think of in regards to production of things, like materials, students creating stuff, and that kind of looks like the endoplasmic reticulum, all those information that are given from the office to those teacher, how is that how does that manifest? And that is where you have the teacher directing students on things that they can create, they can produce to be more effective learners down the road. So those are cool parallels that you can have students to think about, showing that analogy between how a cell operates and in the school or any other institutions how that operates. So cool stuff in there. Now the big one is, how do we integrate the use of microscopes, or introduce microscopes to students? Students should recognize that this is a device we should be taking with care. I'll recommend giving them a tutorial, a little bit of an orientation behind, the different parts of the microscopes, specifically looking at the eyepiece, looking at the focal dial, how is that important in terms of adjusting and seeing clearly what you are trying to look at under the microscope. Objective lens, changing from one particular objective to the other to see, zooming in clearly, all that stuff, and more importantly, looking at the stage where you place your specimen to that of the light source. So those are the, let's say, 5 key parts of the microscope, and it 5 key parts that is common in all microscopes. It can be just a little small one or to the massive one, and so any other extra stuff is where the massive one comes into play. Like for example, how you can hook it up to a computer. You can actually have a particular tech behind it, and some of them have more objective lenses in there. Some of them might have more focal knobs. You can have like the objective and all. Well, you have many more knobs out there. Focal dials, let's put it that way. So it's important for students to be able to label those. You can have like a form of a visual print on how a microscope looks like. They can actually label those parts, write the meaning of those. At the same time, when you're exposing them to a couple of videos, how does that video translate into the use? And so when you're giving them the microscope, you want to give them, I would say, items that is quite easy to visualize before you get into critical parts. So let's say, for example, you want to choose one material to check out, look for items that are not really toxic to them, something that is harmless, like let's say tap water, put it on a lens, put it on the slide, and all that cool stuff under the stage or under the objective lens, put it on the stage. All those little skills, being careful, not running around, all that cool, important stuff. Those are the things that you want students to be exposed to when it comes to the use of microscope. And then you can go into the big details. Actually, our school had like already pre-made dishes of different specimens. Some students were able to see different reproductive cells. They were like, whoa, I saw this, and a kid actually found that really memorable. I was like, this is really hilarious, that you find that part really memorable among all the specimens that they checked out. And some students were able to look at plant cell versus that of animal cell, the differences between them from a pre-made dish, and that pre-made is pretty awesome because it stays and lasts forever, almost forever. And some of them are actually colored, which is pretty cool to see that established. It's pretty nice for them to actually, when they are visualizing, they try to draw it, So you want to show them different ways by which scientists reproduce what they see on paper, either by little sketch and showing little labels and showing the magnification, the title, of that particular specimen on a paper. Really important for them to have that skill in there. And so those are the things that when they get to grade 8, they should be able to accomplish, and by so doing they can go into analysis as to what they saw, making comparisons to other things that they saw, and try to make a rationale behind why one thing is present here and the other thing is not present there, based on how specialized those particular cells are, either unicellular or multicellular organism parts. So I hope you found this really informative in terms of how to introduce cells, to students majority within grade 5 or 4 to grade 8. And let's know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As a teacher, as a student, how were you introduced to cells? Were you introduced through just the generic memorizing stuff, or were you hands-on with regards to just visualizing using the microscopes? And if so, how did that help you to fully understand the complexity of the cell, but also the simplicity at the same time of learning cells in science? All the same, found this really informative. See you on the next one. Stay smart as always and believe in yourselves.